What are some of the signs and symptoms that someone would be experiencing that you've got a bad gut and you need to do something about it?
If you have any complaint, then it's actually coming from your gut. Whether it's a headache, whether it's acne, whether it's eczema, whether it's high blood pressure, diabetes, it's all coming from the gut.
Dr. Gundry is a renowned heart surgeon and the author of several best-selling books, including The Plant Paradox and The Longevity Paradox.
Hippocrates, the father of medicine, 2,500 years ago, said that all disease begins in the gut.
So for somebody who's listening to this and is thinking, you know what, I want to make my gut better, like what are the first few basic things somebody can do?
It takes most people 9 months to literally seal their leaky gut. So the first thing I tell everyone to do is...
I'm Radhi Devlukia, and on my podcast, A Really Good Cry, we embrace the real, the messy, and the beautiful, providing a space for raw, unfiltered conversations that celebrate vulnerability and allow you to tune in to learn, connect, and find comfort together. Dr. Gundry, thank you so much for being here today. I am so excited to have you. We had been on a panel before, and as soon as I heard you speak, I was like, I have to get him on my podcast because I really appreciated so much of what you spoke about. So thank you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm just going to give a little introduction for anybody who doesn't know who Dr. Gundry is. Dr. Gundry is a renowned heart surgeon and the author of several best-selling books, including The Plant Paradox and The Longevity Paradox. He just told me he's on his 9th book now, and he just came out with a new book called The Gut-Brain Paradox: Improve Your Mood, Clear Brain Fog, and Reverse Disease by Healing Your Microbiome. Congratulations.
Well, thanks very much.
9 books, that is incredible. And you spent over 40 years in the medical field, and you are one of the leading experts in gut microbiome. So thank you. I appreciate all the work that you do. And I'm so excited to get into it because I read this stat that said only a third of the American population even knows what the term gut microbiome is. So I want to reel it back and start off by asking, what exactly is the gut microbiome?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, it's amazing that even physicians don't know what the gut microbiome is. Mark Hyman, Dr. Mark Hyman is a friend of mine, and he and I were talking off camera a few months ago. He has a daughter who's a third-year medical student at a very prestigious medical school. Yeah. In her 3rd year, she has yet to have a course on the microbiome.
No.
You know, if doctors aren't being trained about the microbiome, then no one should be embarrassed that they haven't heard about the microbiome. And I'm a slow learner. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, 2,500 years ago, said that all disease begins in the gut. The guy was right. The reason I'm a slow learner is I've been studying the gut now for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And the revelations that we're learning about these marvelous creatures that live in us and on us and the effect they have on everything that happens to us is just remarkable. Microbiome is kind of used to describe the denizens that live in our intestines and that our gut, from our mouth all the way down to our rear end. The vast majority of them live in our large bowel, our colon, and there's about 5 to 6 pounds of these guys. To put actual numbers on them, just in our gut, there's 100 trillion bacteria alone. Wow. There's about 8 trillion trees that have been counted in the world. 8 trillion trees in the world.
Oh my gosh.
And so there's a huge quantum number more bacteria in each of our guts.
Incredible.
There's also 1,000 different species of bacteria that live in our mouths. There's about 700 different species of bacteria that live in our skin. And you and I actually have a cloud of bacteria
surrounding us.
And so that whole group is called the holobiome. But I think it's easier just for nomenclature to call it the microbiome. And that doesn't mention all the viruses that are in there, all the molds and fungi that are in there, and all the other critters, including worms, that are in there.
And what would you say is the main role of the microbiome?
We're a symbiotic organism. And by that, we have agreed to have these guys live in us for the purpose of doing actually a lot of things for us. In exchange, we feed them what they need to eat. Of course, we haven't been doing a good job of that recently, but we take for granted that much of the computing power of our computers is not housed in our computer at all. It's up in the cloud. It's in some supercomputer somewhere else, but we can access that computing power from like our smartphone. Humans have very few genes. We actually have fewer genes than a sand flea, believe it or not.
Wow.
We have fewer genes than corn, and yet we're supposedly the most complex thinking animal there is.
Yeah.
So many of us think that we've actually uploaded our day-to-day decision-making computer power to our microbiome.
Wow.
Why? Because even though individual bacteria don't have as many genes as humans, the vast mass of this bacteria, which are constantly reproducing and constantly changing genes and sharing information with other bacteria, even viruses, we're pretty convinced that we've made most of the decision-making power, computing power for us, our microbiome.
I feel like nobody really knows that. Even when you were saying that it's a symbiotic relationship, in my mind, I feel quite connected to my body and I feel like I know my body quite well, but I've never thought of it as a symbiotic relationship that I am feeding these gut microbiome and the gut microbiome are doing so much for me. You always think that the body is here for me to use and to utilize, but you don't realize that there's so much living within us that it's actually a relationship that we have with everything that's within our body. And it's alive and they're microorganisms that have so much intelligence.
It's hard for us intelligent thinking creatures to conceive that these one-cell organisms have intelligence, that they're sentient beings. And yet we know that they can actually see other bacteria. They can actually know how many of their kind are near them. It's called quorum sensing. It's almost like planning a rage party or something, a rave party. They can actually know when to make an action. They can know who a bad guy is, and they can actually make combinations of chemicals to try and make those bad guys go away. They can even try to save each other. I just came back from a big microbiome meeting in Malta.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, I usually present there every year, and I did this year. But one of the most amazing things is that bacteria, believe it or not, are predated upon by viruses. They're infected by viruses called phages. And to try and to save their kind from viruses, they'll share antiviral information with each other through little text messages. Like, okay, there's viruses on the way. Here's how to outsmart them.
Wow.
And so we're finally beginning to able to see how complex this society is that lives within us.
Yeah.
One of my patients is a Buddhist scholar, and he reads Sanskrit. And we were talking about this not too long ago. And he said, I wonder if the Buddha knew this, because Buddha and Hippocrates were actually contemporaries.
Oh, wow.
And he came back, and he says, guess what? In Sanskrit, the Buddha says enlightenment comes from the intestines.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's like, whoa.
He did know it.
Yeah, Hippocrates knew it, Buddha knew it.
I do think there's so much in ancient wisdom. I've studied Ayurveda very briefly and I study a lot of texts that are Sanskrit, and it just blows my mind that we disregard knowledge that has been around for thousands and thousands of years, but we accept things that have been around for 15 years, 10 years, 5 years so easily. And I think there's this really interesting balance between everything needing to be scientifically proven and how it's scientifically proven versus knowledge that has come down from generations and generations and generations. And I would love to ask, how do you balance that as someone who is part of the doctor world, part of the medical industry, but you're quoting things from Hippocrates and from such ancient wisdom. How do you balance that in the work that you do?
If you had asked me even 20 years ago what I thought about leaky gut, I probably would have told you it was pseudoscience.
Wow.
There's a professor who's now a pediatric gastroenterologist at Harvard who has actually found how leaky gut happens, how to quantify it, how to measure it. And I've been measuring leaky gut in my patients now for 15 years. And we can not only quantify it, but measure it. And we can watch it heal. We can watch it get worse. We can put now science on what was seemingly pseudoscience.
Right.
And what's really exciting about the microbiome, long ago, when back in the dark ages when I was in medical school, we used to kind of think that the GI tract, the gut was, well, we'd eat some stuff, we'd squirt some enzymes in it, magic happened, we would absorb nutrients, and whatever we didn't need went out the rear end.
Right.
Well, now, since the Human Microbiome Project, which only got started in 2007 and finished in 2017, very recent history, we now know that the magic that was actually these gut microbiome. And now we can not only count their numbers, we can identify who they are, and we can actually figure out what those guys are doing. And we discovered, I wrote 2 books about this language that they communicate with us and with themselves that are called postbiotics. And most of us have heard about probiotics, which are the, quote, friendly bacteria.
Yes.
A lot of us are beginning to understand that the probiotics need food to eat, which are prebiotics, which are mostly soluble fiber. And what we didn't know was, okay, what do they do once they eat?
Yeah.
They produce these compounds, which are now called postbiotics. This is an amazingly complex messaging system that uses gases, that use short-chain fatty acids, and literally text messages called exosomes and extracellular vesicles. I just came back from the Society of Extracellular Vesicles. There is such a thing where we can now actually see and measure these text messages that bacteria send to us that actually make us do things.
Wow, like what? Give me an example.
We know that people who are depressed or anxious have a depressive microbiome, have an anxious microbiome that literally send out messages to make us depressed, to make us anxious. I got into this because a great number of my patients, most of whom have autoimmune diseases, were on 1 or 2 antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications. And early on, I used to see a lot of men for heart disease and for diabetes and high blood pressure. And I always felt that this sport was a 2-person sport, so I would make their wives come in and get a history and physical from them as well. And invariably, the wives were usually skinny and just so happened to be on 1 or 2 antidepressants. And I go, how come you're on antidepressants? She says, oh, geez, if you were married to him, you'd be on an antidepressant. True story. But a huge number of my female patients were on antidepressants, so long that they often wouldn't even think that of writing depression as a complaint.
Right.
And I said, I think you're going to find that as we go along that you're probably not going to need your antidepressants anymore. I don't want you to stop them, but let's just see. And I write about one of my patients who, as we went along, she was on 2 antidepressants. And I saw her usually I see him every 3 months. And about 9 months in, she had a sheepish look on her face when I saw her. She said, "Don't get mad at me, but I'm off my antidepressants." And I said,
Wow.
"I'm not mad at you. That's what I would have expected. I didn't want to tell you, but we had changed. She had changed her microbiome. She had stopped her leaky gut. She was no longer getting signals to her brain that she was under attack, if you will.
Right.
And she said, the amazing thing is, you won't believe how much better my brain works now because that fog of the antidepressants was gone.
That's so interesting.
And what's really exciting, most antidepressants are what are called serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs.
Mm-hmm.
And supposedly they work by preventing the breakdown of serotonin in our brain, the feel-good hormone.
Okay.
Well, if that's how they actually worked, then one would think I could swallow one of these and the next day my depression would be gone because my serotonin would not be broken down.
Mm-hmm.
It takes at least a month for these things to have any effect. So then you go, well, what's the mechanism that these things are acting? And sure enough, it turns out that these drugs actually change the microbiome to a non-depressive microbiome.
Wow.
And microbiome change doesn't happen overnight. It takes actually quite a period of time. So unbeknownst to any of us, the action of these drugs was actually happening down in the gut, not in the brain.
Wow. And
the gut-brain paradox.
Yes. Oh, I need to read that book, actually. That sounds so fascinating. When people are thinking about their gut, now we know that there's, from what you've just told us, there's a correlation between our gut and our emotions, our depressive points in our life, our anxieties. But what does a normal person that doesn't know much about the gut, how can they know that they've got something wrong with the gut? And how do you know what a healthy gut looks like? What do you feel like? What does it feel like?
Well, it's interesting. Women, I have a wife and 2 daughters. Women have a gut sense. And men, unfortunately, somehow don't get that.
Right.
But you guys are really much more in touch with your gut. And I think it's intriguing that autoimmune diseases are actually far more common in women than they are in men.
Yes.
And here's another shocking finding is, believe it or not, dementia and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's is much more common in women than it is in men. And I mean, you guys are the stronger sex. I mean, come on. And one of the reasons is because you guys, your gut microbiome and the wall of your gut, your intestinal permeability is, no offense, really lousy.
Interesting.
We now know that what happens in the gut is not like Las Vegas. It doesn't stay in the gut. And what happens in the gut actually is transmitted, among other things, to the brain, both good things and bad things.
Right.
And so we now know that, for instance, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's is actually caused from the gut, not the other way around. And that the brain is actually trying to protect itself from this perceived attack, these hordes that are leaving the gut and coming up to attack the brain. People hear about amyloid plaques and tau proteins in the brain. These are actually defensive mechanisms that the immune system of the brain is throwing down like barriers because of this attack that's on the way from the gut.
Wow.
And we're just now really beginning to understand how, this is happening and what we can do not only to stop it, but to roll back the damage. And that's what's the exciting part.
Yeah.
All of this is fixable.
At least that's hopeful.
Yeah.
That is hopeful. And so what are some of the signs and symptoms that someone will be experiencing to know that they need to be working on their gut? Like that you've got a bad gut and you need to do something about it?
Well, for instance, I'll give you a personal example. I was a very famous heart surgeon, did baby heart transplants, and I did baby heart transplants with migraine headaches. And I don't recommend that.
Yeah.
My father had migraines, so I assumed, well, he had migraines, I have migraines.
Yeah.
Imagine my surprise when I started changing my diet many years ago, 30 years ago, that my migraine headaches went away.
No.
Yeah. And I haven't had a migraine headache in 30 years. And a lot of what I wrote about in my earliest books were people with migraine headaches.
Yes. I have people in my family with migraines.
Yeah, who their migraine headaches went away when we changed their gut. And, I made some bold statements in my biggest bestseller, The Plant Paradox, that if you have any complaint, then it's actually coming from your gut. Whether it's a headache, whether it's acne, whether it's eczema, whether it's the heartbreak of psoriasis, whether it's high blood pressure, whether it's diabetes, whether it's coronary artery disease,
right.
It's all coming from the gut. And like Hippocrates said, all disease comes from the gut. And I paraphrase him to say, well, all disease can be reversed from the gut. And that's why I still see patients 6 days a week.
Wow.
Even on Saturdays and Sundays.
Really?
Yeah.
They need it.
Well,
Really
I need it because I get to see what I would have called a miracle 30 years ago because it was so unexpected, so unable to be explained by science, if you will. But now I hope not a day goes by that I don't get to see, a miracle.
Yeah.
What I would have called a miracle, now it's like, I wonder, I'm like a kid in a candy store.
Waiting.
Bad example. But, I just can't wait to who I'm going to see today that's going to tell me this great story.
And what are some of the basic things that people can start with? Sometimes everyone's sold supplements and everyone's sold so many things that can be really expensive to go and get your checks done, to get your gut checked, to get your bloods checked. Health nowadays can be quite an expensive journey. So for somebody who's listening to this, and is thinking, you know what, I want to make my gut better. Where do I start? Like, what are the first few basic things somebody can do? Yeah,
so the first thing I tell everyone to do is start taking vitamin D3.
Okay, great.
Here in Southern California, 80% of my patients, when I first see them, are vitamin D deficient.
Yeah.
The CDC, and we live in Southern California.
Exactly.
It's always sunny. Well,
in London.
London.
London does not get the sunshine, so I imagine they definitely need some vitamin D.
Yeah, and so we do not get enough vitamin D from the sun, and we're told to slather on sunscreen and protect ourselves. Yeah. So we do not have enough vitamin D. Okay. And vitamin D is absolutely, positively essential to keep, number one, the wall of our gut intact. Number two, it turns out that the higher your level of vitamin D, the more diverse your gut microbiome is.
Oh.
Now, what I mean by that, we know now that this gut microbiome is kind of like a tropical rainforest. And just like a tropical rainforest, there's these diverse number of species, and they're all kind of dependent on each other. Each does a particular job. And if one of them kind of overgrows, the other guys kind of gang up and keep things in balance.
Yeah.
What happens is vitamin D actually promotes this diversity of the gut microbiome. So that's number one.
Yeah.
The University of California, San Diego, down the road, has a huge vitamin D research group.
Oh, okay.
They think the average American should be taking 9,600 international units of vitamin D3 a day. That's basically 10,000 international units.
Yeah.
For people who don't use the international units, that's 250 micrograms.
Okay.
You can buy these little 5,000 IU vitamin Ds anywhere.
Yes.
And they're little bitty things. And so there's no excuse to just pop a couple of these in your mouth. I've never seen vitamin D toxicity. I don't think it exists.
Oh, good. That's good to know.
The University of California, San Diego, hasn't seen vitamin D toxicity at 40,000 international units a day.
And is there a difference between taking liquid form or a capsule? Does one absorb better than the other?
Believe it or not, most of the time the capsules work much better than the liquid.
Really?
Yes, most of my patients on the liquid think the liquid's better, but when we change them over to the capsule form, their vitamin Ds go up much better.
Okay, that's good to know. I always thought maybe the liquid form
everybody seems to think that, but it's quite the opposite in my practice.
Okay.
So that's number one.
Yes.
Number two, you got to give these, I call them gut buddies, the good guys, things that they need to eat.
Okay.
And in general, that's prebiotic fiber. What the heck is that? Well, prebiotic fiber, long ago, our great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents ate a lot of tubers, whether they were root vegetables in general. Artichokes are a great source of prebiotic fiber. The chicory family of vegetables is one of the best. Asparagus is a great source. Even things like plantains are a great source. Green bananas are a great source. Not ripe bananas.
Yes.
They're unfortunately pure sugar. So getting these into the diet is really important because this is what these guys want to eat. But there's a very important proviso, and I like to give credit where credit is due. There's a husband and wife team at Stanford. They're microbiologists by the name of the Sonnenbergs. And they did a really great experiment with healthy human volunteers. They asked them to eat a lot of prebiotic fiber. In this case, it was inulin, and inulin is in chicory. They looked at their gut microbiome diversity, and a more diverse is better. And they looked at their inflammation markers, and they gave them all this fiber, and their gut microbiome diversity didn't change, and their inflammation markers didn't change. And they go, well, what the heck? This is what these guys want to eat. What? So they said, I wonder if back in the good old days, our ancestors ate a lot of fermented foods, whether they knew it or not. Even something as simple as bread up until 70 years ago was fermented in the process of, raising bread. We ate a lot of fermented foods. The only way you could preserve dairy was via fermentation to make it into a yogurt or kefir or a cheese. In fact, the only way you could preserve meat long ago was by fermentation, by literally bacterial fermentation of sausages. Fun fact, prosciutto is actually a fermented food.
Right.
Yeah. So they said, maybe we should give these guys fermented foods. Sauerkraut, another one. Kombucha, not the high sugar kombucha, please. We'll give them some yogurts and we'll give them some kefirs, and we'll also give them the inulin.
Yes.
The combination of the fermented foods and the inulin, now all of a sudden their gut microbiome diversity bloomed and their inflammation markers went down.
Wow.
So it was 1-2 punch. So you've got to give the bacteria what they need, but they also need these precursors, which are postbiotics. That's one of the huge things that's missing from our diet. So we don't have any fiber in our diet.
Yes.
And we don't have any fermented foods in our diet. But you got to have both.
Amazing. Fiber, fermented foods, vitamin D.
Yeah. Okay. Then the third thing.
Let's tell us.
Okay. I can heal somebody's leaky gut. When I started doing this years ago, I was naive and I thought you could do it in 2 weeks. Boy, was I wrong. It takes most people 9 months to a year to literally seal their leaky gut. I, for instance, make supplements at Gundry MD. They're pretty doggone good at sealing leaky gut. And I'm happy to sell them to you. But if you keep swallowing razor blades every day, you will just slice that right open again. Now, what are the razor blades? Well, that's what made me famous or infamous. And those are some of the foods that we think are really good for us. And these are lectin-containing foods. And lectins are plant proteins that are the defense system of the plant against it or its babies, its seeds being eaten. Probably the most famous is gluten. 100% of my patients with leaky gut are sensitive to gluten in wheat, rye, barley, and there's also a gluten-like molecule in oats. And so I at least temporarily take those away.
Right.
70% of my patients are sensitive to the proteins in corn. 70%.
Wow.
And gluten-free people are eating mostly corn products. And that's why they don't, in general, get any better.
Wow.
And I see them all the time. Next are the nightshade family of vegetables, the white potato, the tomato, the peppers, the eggplant, and goji berries are actually nightshades. So the good news about that is the lectins are in the peels and the seeds.
Yes.
So if you peel and de-seed them, you do just fine. Finally, beans. Beans are loaded with lectins, legumes, peas. They are just full of it. But if you ferment them, if you soak them, have you ever soaked beans in a pot?
Yes.
Okay. Do you ever notice the scum that happens? That scum and all those bubbles.
Phytates, isn't
that's the fermentation.
Oh.
It's breaking down the lectins. Bacteria eat lectins. So the fermentation process destroys lectins. And traditionally, for instance, in Tuscany, you usually soak beans for 48 hours before you cook them.
Yeah, my mum only soaks her beans. She doesn't buy any canned beans. She only soaks all her beans and her lentils.
Yeah, now
scratch.
the good news is there are 2 companies that pressure cook beans and take the work out of it. Pressure cooking destroys lectins, except gluten. It won't destroy gluten.
Oh, great.
So Eden brand, and again, I have no affiliation with these people.
This is so good to know.
Yeah, Eden brand beans, EDEN.
Yes, I've seen them.
And there's no BPA in their cans.
Great.
And then there's an Italian company called Jovial.
Yes.
That soaks their beans and then pressure cooks them.
And they, I think, have them in glass jars.
They're glass jars. So triple good. There's quick ways around this. So I'm a big bean fan as long as you basically detoxify them.
Yes.
People go, Dr. Gundry hates beans. I don't hate beans. But one of the things I see that's really disturbing to me is all this pea protein that is now being put in things.
Yeah.
Pea protein is a bean. It's a legume. And just recently I had a patient who's been doing extremely well. And he had Hashimoto's thyroiditis. We resolved it. He had leaky gut. We resolved it. And he recently called me. He says, hey, I just had my thyroid checked and my thyroid's acting up. And what the heck? And I said, did you change anything in your diet? He said, are you kidding me? You know me. I eat so clean. I said, did you add any drinks? He said, oh yeah, I added a new drink that, it's a green drink and it's really good. It's clean. And I said, take a screenshot. Number 2 ingredient was pea protein. And I said, what the heck are you doing with that? And he said, what do you mean? I said, it's pea protein. He said, oh, shoot. And he said, all right, I'm stopping it. So I actually just talked to him 10 days later. He said, you're not going to believe this. My energy level is through the roof after I stopped that stuff. Why didn't you warn me? I'm standing around looking at everything you eat. But I see this over and over again when people are adding these superfoods or super drinks, that usually there's a culprit, and you just have to look at the label really carefully.
I last year, because I was trying to increase my muscle mass, and I had my trainers and people telling me, you have to increase your protein, and I'm plant-based, so I don't eat meat or fish or anything. And so I started taking protein shakes, and I was having sometimes 2 protein shakes a day, both of them made from pea protein. And my gut, as time was going on, I could feel it. I was like, my gut is not happy. And I was like, no, but I have to have this because they're telling me I need to hit 130 grams of protein at least. And I was trying my best. And I went away over the holidays, and then I went to India where I do like my spiritual retreat. And during that time, I had time to think, and I was like, my gut has been telling me for so long, you are not happy. And I've been ignoring it for so long. I came back here and I was like, I'm not doing it. I could feel my body was deteriorating in other ways.
Yeah.
And again, like, it was not just affecting my gut. I was feeling my slump again in the afternoon where I felt like I had no energy even though I'd eaten. And I was progressively feeling like I was getting worse and worse. And I was like, how can it be that? Because I've been being told that this is what I need. But now I've just started having proteins from whole sources rather than trying to have it in powders and through protein bars and through all this processed synthetic ways of having them, which by the way, mostly have pea protein.
Yep.
And that's so interesting that you've said that.
Yeah, it's very cheap. And, and the other thing we miss is, again, our great-great-grandparents, there was no such thing as a protein powder.
Yes, exactly.
They ate whole things. Now, whether they ate whole plants that were usually fermented, or they ate whole pieces of animal, that was very different. And it took a long time, number one, for those to be digested into individual amino acids that would then be absorbed.
Right.
And there would be lots of leftover things, prebiotics that our gut buddies were waiting for.
Right.
Well, now we've stripped these things down to basically powdered amino acids. And what people don't realize is they're instantly absorbed.
Yes.
And here's the bad news. There's a professor of nutrition at Stanford by the name of Christopher Gardner. He's basically a vegan, but the U.S. government sets a quote, minimum requirement, USDA, for protein, right? Yes. Well, what people don't know is that when setting these standards, the average American needs about, the standard is 0.9 grams of protein per kilogram, right? Where did that standard come from? Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out that 50% of Americans only will get all of their protein requirement with less than half of that. Yes. They extended to cover 95% of people. So basically, their recommendations are twice the amount that a normal person needs. Yes. Twice.
Yes.
And what's really exciting is every day we recycle 20 grams of protein by eating our mucus and our dead cells. Seriously.
Wow.
So Walter Longo at USC and I both say that really and Christopher Gardner, all we mostly need is about 40 grams of protein a day. And here's the worst part. Read the papers. About 82% of all the protein that we consume is converted not into muscle and bone, but is converted to sugar. Why? Because we do not have a storage system for calories that's based on muscle. Mm-hmm. We have a storage system for calories that's based on turning sugar into fat. And so we don't waste that protein. We convert it into sugar. It's called gluconeogenesis, so that we can store it as fat.
Well, I will tell you, I've been not doing it for 3 weeks, and I went up in muscle mass more than I did when I was on it. And my inflammation has gone down. Yeah. My body feels so much better. Mm. And that's only 3 weeks of being in remission from having so much protein. And I also read that most people in America, there's more danger of people being eating too much protein than there is of people being deficient of it.
We are over-proteinized in this country.
I wonder why it's become such a focus. There's always something, isn't it? There's always a cycle of something.
There's always something. There's always a TikTok trend.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
And sadly, it usually has very little basis in fact.
Yes. Okay. So now that we're on things that, people should be avoiding, are there any other, give me like your top 5 things that people may not be realizing that they are eating, but is actually damaging their gut? I know we spoke about the lectins and just pea protein. Is there anything else that you recommend people look out for when they're reading labels?
One of the things that we really should be looking at is the type of oils that are in most of the products. I think the seed oil fear is a bit overblown, quite frankly. There are actually superb seed oils. And my favorite of all time is the number 1 oil of Korea and most of China, which is perilla seed oil.
Oh.
People usually have never heard of perilla.
No.
Do you know the coleus plant? These very beautiful multicolored leaves that people have in their gardens or sometimes as indoor. So that's a perilla plant.
Oh, okay.
And
I didn't even know they make oil from that.
Well, they if you let them bloom,
yes,
then they make seeds, and they press the seeds, and that's where perilla oil comes from. Now, the cool thing about perilla oil is it's almost pure a short chain omega-3 fat called alpha-linolenic acid, short ALA. Now, supposedly the evil short chain omega-6 fat is linoleic acid, and they sound very similar. So ALA from perilla oil is one of the best ways experimentally and in my practice to keep bacterial particles out of our bloodstream, which are called lipopolysaccharides. They're abbreviated LPSs. I don't swear, but how you remember it is little pieces of shit.
Okay, great.
Because that's literally what they are.
Oh.
And so this inflammation that we feel, this, believe it or not, loss of muscle mass is these little guys getting through the wall of your gut.
Wow.
And it turns out perilla oil blocks them from doing that. I put my patients basically on pure perilla oil for several weeks. I don't even give them my favorite olive oil.
Yeah.
And I just take it away. Now, here's the other thing. The next best that you can get with the highest amount of ALA is organic canola oil.
Oh.
Now, most canola oil is sprayed with glyphosate. But now we are finding producers who are making organic canola oil. So canola oil is not the evil empire if it's organic. It's not the best. I think perilla oil is, and most perilla oil is organic. But I'm not afraid to tell my patients, look, if you can't find perilla oil, it's pretty easy now to find organic canola oil.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I've just been hearing how canola oil is the devil for so long.
Let me tell you about the devil, because I get a lot of pushback about this. So canola is hybridized rapeseed oil.
Right.
And if you're in Europe, rapeseed is everywhere. It's basically a cousin of mustard.
Right.
And it's blooming everywhere.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It is. So there was a human trial a number of years ago called the Lyon Heart Diet. Most people call it the Lion Heart Diet, but it was in Lyon, France, Lyon. And they took 2 groups of people who had heart attacks, had heart disease, and they randomized them to 2 diets. One was the low-fat American Heart Association diet. The other was a diet where they were made to use a margarine spread from rapeseed oil.
Right.
Alpha-linolenic acid. Rapeseed is almost pure alpha. It's basically canola oil.
Yes.
The trial was supposed to go 6 years. They stopped the trial after 3 years because the people who were using the rapeseed oil margarine, the high ALA margarine, had so much better results with no new heart attacks that they stopped the trial as unethical to continue against the American Heart Association low-fat diet.
Wow.
When the researchers broke down, well, what was it that was the difference between the two diets? It was only the level of alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, in their blood that was the only difference. Wow. So every time I hear canola oil is the devil's, oil, well, that's funny. That was the trial, and that was the component of the oil that caused the difference.
That is incredible. How like so much can get misconstrued and misunderstood in so many ways, and then there's social media, which amplifies it.
Yeah. And so it's like, come on, folks. Most canola oil up until the last few years was sprayed with glyphosate.
Right.
Glyphosate's the evil empire as far as I'm. But now that there's organic canola oil, let's not be afraid of it.
And are there any other oils that you recommend people stay away from, or what are the best oils to cook with? So you've said, what was it called again?
Perilla.
Perilla oil?
Yeah, so the cool thing about Perilla, it's pretty tasteless.
And is it easy to find?
Yeah. I mean,
great.
Yeah, you can go to any Asian store and get it.
Amazing.
It's on Amazon.
Okay.
There's numerous producers of it now. So, yeah, it's pretty easy to find. I am a huge fan of olive oil. Whenever we're looking for oils, there's nothing unique about this monounsaturated fat oleic acid.
Right.
There's nothing, it's not a great oil, but it's a carrier for what are called polyphenols.
Yes.
And polyphenols, it now turns out, are plant compounds that our microbiome, our gut buddies, love to eat.
Okay.
And the more polyphenols that they're given, the happier they are and the more diverse they are. So olive oil is a really great way to get polyphenols into your diet. It's not the oleic acid. There's nothing unique about oleic acid. And, this new trend, algae oil, is all oleic acid. So what? It doesn't have any polyphenols in it. So, there's nothing wrong with it, but if you're looking for a health benefit, you're not going to get a health benefit from a monounsaturated fat. There's no evidence of that.
No. Okay, and then cooking with oils, you hear about coconut oil being a good oil to cook with because there's a high smoke point, and that you shouldn't cook with olive oil because it's got a low smoke point.
So I've had some of the world experts on olive oil on my podcast, and they assure me and you that olive oil is actually the safest cooking oil, that it has a low smoke point, but smoke point has nothing to do with oxidation. In fact, olive oil oxidizes less than coconut oil. Wow.
Yeah.
And if it was that dangerous, then why has it been used as a cooking oil for 5,000 years?
Exactly.
And why do most of the blue zones use olive oil to cook with and consume? I mean, interestingly enough, the per capita consumption of olive oil in Greece is a 0.5 liter per week. Per week.
That sounds good to me.
Capita. So that means most adults are actually having almost 1 liter per week.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I wanted to ask a few more questions because this is so interesting. Tell me what some of the signs are that people will have leaky gut. If they're looking out for it, what are some of the signs and symptoms they can expect? So
if you have either constipation and or diarrhea or loose bowel movements, I can virtually guarantee you have leaky gut.
Okay. As simple as that.
Yeah, simple as that. If you have IBS, you have leaky gut. If you have some disease that somebody tells you have, like, if you've got a patch of eczema, you have leaky gut. If you have acne, you have leaky gut. If you're depressed, you have leaky gut. If you're anxious, you have leaky gut. If your loved one has heart disease, you have leaky gut. If you've got brain fog, you have leaky gut.
Oh my God.
Honest. I mean, we can measure this.
Yes.
And we can watch the brain fog go away when you repair your leaky gut. As I tell my patients, if you have leaky gut, you actually have leaky brain. And there's this amazing barrier. So we have a barrier between all of our microbiome and us,
Yes.
which is the wall of our gut. And we have that wall of our gut is the surface area of 1 or 2 tennis courts.
That's incredible.
So when we were watching the Australian Open or we watch the Indian Wells, BNP in a couple of weeks, there's 1 or 2 tennis courts inside of us.
Wow.
And the lining of our gut is only 1 cell thick. That's a design flaw. So all of these 100 trillion bacteria, we need a fence to keep them on their side of the fence.
Yes.
Good fences make good neighbors.
Yeah.
And what we've learned is if that fence gets broken or is leaky or intestinal permeability, then not only can bacteria and pieces of bacteria get through, but also other particles of undigested food. And our immune system, 80% of all of our white blood cells are downlining our gut because that's where trouble can come through. 80% are down there. We have the same sort of barrier that protects our brain. It's called the blood-brain barrier. And we can measure if somebody has leaky gut. We can measure the leakiness of the blood-brain barrier, and it's leaking. And so it's no wonder that our brain doesn't work properly. We now know that our bacteria can get into our brain, and that's not exactly what we want.
No. And is it possible for someone to heal their gut without having to see a professional? Can they do it just by following your book?
That's why I write these books.
Yes, so people have it accessible.
It's the handbook. So my current book is called Gut Check, which is all about this, but the gut-brain paradox is specifically for those people who have a mood disorder, who are depressed or anxious, or who have a loved one who has memory issues, has cognitive decline, has Parkinson's, and has addiction problems. It turns out addiction is driven by a gut microbiome dysbiosis and by leaky gut. And the gut microbiome, these bad guys, actually control the addictive behavior to get you to give them more of the things they want. And they use pain as the main way. And how's the pain occur? By leaky gut.
I've got people in my family and friends who have multiple things that you just said that could probably be linked to leaky gut.
Yeah.
They've had the addiction, they've had the eczema, they've had depression, they've had so many of these things combined. That's so interesting. I have to send them your book. When it comes to antibiotics, does 1 dose of antibiotic really cause havoc in the gut?
Absolutely. Some research suggests that 1 course of antibiotics will basically burn down that tropical rainforest, and it could stay burned down for 2 years. I was in medical school in the 70s when broad-spectrum antibiotics were introduced, and it was miraculous. Don't get me wrong. They are life-saving. I'm not saying don't take them if you need them. But what we didn't know, we didn't even know these guys existed down there.
Right.
And so we didn't know that just by swallowing these antibiotics, we were killing off our gut microbiome. The other scary thing that people don't know is that antibiotics in and of themselves cause leaky gut. And one of the saddest things is well-meaning physicians treat people for SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and they give them antibiotics. That's the last thing somebody should treat SIBO with. SIBO, believe it or not, is a lot less common than people think, but I've never treated SIBO with antibiotics, and we just put them on our program, and miraculously the SIBO goes away. The problem with broad-spectrum antibiotics, we still use them willy-nilly.
Yeah.
We use them mostly for viral infections, which they don't work on.
Nope.
And we feed them to our animals to make them grow quicker and faster and fatter. So that when we eat these animals, we eat the antibiotics that are in their flesh. And so we're constantly killing off this fabulous tropical rainforest. Now, since we live in Southern California, yes, forests burn down. We could go plant seedlings and swallow probiotics. Think about it. It will take 20 years for those seedlings to grow up and make a forest again. And yet we're naive to think, well, I'll take some probiotics and don't worry. It doesn't work that way. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
In fact, the Sonnenbergs believe that most of us have a desert wasteland instead of a tropical rainforest.
And so what should people do if they have taken a dose of antibiotics, or, is there a way to avoid taking antibiotics?
Well,
when you're going
most
through
of the time, you have to realize that the vast majority of infections that we encounter are actually viral infections, and antibiotics have no place in viral infections.
So many of my friends would have a cough, go to the doctor, and they would be like, you may not need the antibiotics, but, if it continues for a couple of days, start taking it.
Right.
And they don't really know what the actual cause is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I was a medical student, we rotated through private practice physicians' offices as part of our training. And I was in a pediatrician's office, and the nurse would swab the kid's throat for strep throat and put it on a petri dish. And then as the mother left, the nurse would give the mother a prescription for antibiotics and for some decongestants. And I'd watch this, and I'm going, you're not going to have the result of that culture for 48 hours, and it probably won't be strep throat. It usually isn't. Why did you give her antibiotics? And he looked at me and he said, look, give the mother something to do, the kid will get better on his own. If I don't give the mother those antibiotics, she'll go down to the street to my competitor and he'll be happy to give it to her. And it's interesting. There have now been studies of ER doctors. If the person coming in with an illness questions the ER doctor about whether they really should have that antibiotic, the ER doctor is half as likely as normal to give them to them. But if they come in requesting antibiotics, they'll absolutely get them because they came into the emergency room and you got to do something for them. That's human nature.
And is there something that people can be taking instead? Like if they get a viral infection, what should they, and let's say for me, I haven't taken antibiotics for over 10 years now. I refuse to take them.
Good for you.
What is to somebody who's worried about not taking them, what is something that they could be doing for that viral infection that could help support it at the time?
If our immune system is not preoccupied with what's going on down in our gut, then our immune system is available to fight viral infections.
Right.
And if you notice during COVID, if you thought about all the people who were really susceptible to, COVID, diabetics, high blood pressure, heart disease, etc., those are the people who actually have those conditions from leaky gut.
Yes.
And what we know now is if 80% of your immune system is busy down in your gut, distracted, then they're not available up in your upper airways and respiratory tract. We also know that bacteria are really good at fighting viruses.
Yes.
They actually have really cool tricks to fight viruses, and yet we've wiped them out. Lastly, I am a huge proponent of very high dose vitamin D for a viral infection.
Okay.
Now, I'll tell you what I do. This is not a recommendation. It's what I do.
Yes.
I take 150,000 international units of vitamin D3 3 days in a row if I feel like I'm coming down with something. That's basically 500,000 international units of vitamin D3.
Okay.
I'm not dead yet.
No, you're not. You look very healthy to me.
Now, again, that is not my recommendation to the general public. That's what I do personally.
Yep.
At the very least, you should think about taking 50,000 international units of D3 3 days in a row.
Okay.
Okay?
So taking probiotics when you're on antibiotics doesn't really do much.
It is a good idea, but you got to do a whole lot more than that. The first thing is more preventive. Try not to get those antibiotics in the first place. I
want to ask you so many more questions, but I'm going to wrap it up and hopefully I get to have you on one more time to ask you all the other questions I have. I'd
be delighted to come back. You got to make the LA traffic better.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much, Dr. Gundry. This was so informative and I know this is going to help so many people with their gut and their overall health. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Good to see you again.
You too.